Hello everybody, I hope you're doing great today. In my own personal life, I've been really busy this week, so I'm doing a compilation, but the next video after this and the ones following will all have new stories in them. So sorry about that, I've just had some things I've had to take care of recently and not had as much time for this video, but the next ones will be back to normal. So I hope you enjoyed these stories anyway. And make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac and the podcast in the description below. And I do have a message before the video starts. So quickly I'd like to share this. Remember that when it comes to dealing with mental health issues, you have to understand that not everybody's going to understand it at the time. Often people can only perceive the world for the way that they've always experienced it. And you trying to tell them anything else is often foreign to them and they just instantly reject it. Don't get hurt if this happens. You have to be very careful who you're open with about certain things. I know because I've made that mistake before myself. And it used to get me down because they wouldn't understand or say, oh, it's okay, just brush it off or whatever. But that's not the way to deal with this. This is something that you need to go and sort out with a therapist, and maybe the ones that you love that you can trust with the information, but just be very mindful of that. And another thing I'd like to share is that the worst thing I think for most people's mental health when it comes to depression and anxiety is actually being stuck indoors all day, not doing anything, and not going out and socializing or seeing other people. It might feel like you want to quit your job and you don't want to work or you don't want to do anything, but trust me, if you're stuck indoors all day, even if you're making money, it's going to have a negative impact on your mental health. And it wasn't until I started going outside and doing more regular things that it all started to change for me. I know that it's extremely difficult in COVID times, but if you have been vaccinated or are well enough and safe enough to actually go outside without being vulnerable, then I really recommend you do that. Because I know somebody listening to this right now might not have a job or anything and might be depressed and down and think that staying indoors all day and at home will help their depression, but trust me, it's going to make it 100 times worse. Find the thing that you're passionate at. It's okay to take time to do this, and once you've found it and know what you need to do to go and get on with it, go and get after it. I'm telling you, it'll make a big difference. And you won't realize it at the time, but even just having those really small interactions with other people throughout the day and having different things going on in your mind really helps make a difference. I know you're going to have days where you wake up and you just want to stay in bed and you don't want to see people, but trust me, most days you're going to feel a lot better for actually going out and working or doing something you enjoy than just staying indoors. And I know that I'm saying it because it can be very difficult to realize it sometimes if you're stuck in a cycle of just being indoors. But trust me, you have to go against it and it will make a massive difference. Or I hope it can. So I love you and enjoy these stories. Take care and I'll speak to you all next week. I want to post the full version. The Woods. This is a very strange story, and I'm not the best at writing things out, but I'm gonna try. I live in Georgia, the state, in a rural town not far from a major city. There's a set of woods that's behind our house, and it divides the two neighborhoods. It's about a mile wide, if that. Strange things occur here and always have. Small things like random trash, traps, etc. I should mention it's more swampy marshes and woods, so it makes camping in there impossible. Now one night, I was taking our dog out. He stays in the back half of the house due to him not liking other dogs. I took him out to the side door and walk around the house to the fence. For some reason, when we left the house, he was absolutely terrified. He didn't want to go out. Very unusual for a dog who's quick to snatch someone's soul if prompted. Not thinking about it, we pushed onwards. After he tinkled, we walked back. This is when I noticed it, or rather heard it. The crunching of leaves. At first I thought it was one of our dozen cats on the property, until I realized it was actually matching me. If I walked, you could hear it walking. If I stopped, it would stop. There's a small clearing between the woods where one of the sheds is. That's when I saw it. My dog was first to see someone. Then I saw, I don't know, a creature. It was taller than the shed, so maybe a good 8 feet tall, and it darted across the clearing crazy quick. My dog, who, again, isn't scared of anything, bolts, so I quickly dropped the leash and he ran to the door whining. I was quickly behind him. Once we're inside, I quickly bolted the door and ran to my girlfriend and tell her what happened. She immediately wanted me to investigate, saying it's probably a woodland creature. Armed with 2 flashlights, we go out. As soon as we walk towards the wooded line, we can hear something moving around, maybe 200 yards away. As we scanned with our flashlights, we don't see anything, but keep hearing it. Then we heard it getting closer and closer until maybe it's 20 feet away. Still, nothing. No eyes, not even an animal call or noises. My now scared girlfriend heads out to the house. I decide to check with the neighbours to see if maybe one of the dogs has actually got out. When I arrive at my neighbour's house, who we'll call Dave, he explained that all of his dogs are accounted for. Curious, he came to investigate. He appears a little spooked though. That's when I noticed whatever this thing was following me through the woods to Dave's house, and now actually going around it. This is really weird. Gun in hand, we went into his backyard searching for something. We could hear it rustling, maybe running around. It's about 100 yards away in thick swampy woods. Way too thick for a person to walk in, let alone run. Then it stopped. It was dead silent, scanning on the edge, and we can hear something, but see nothing. Then bam! It's 5 feet in front of us. It slammed the fence so hard it rocked it back and forth. Dave, who's scared terribly, shoots at, well, nothing. We stop for a second and look at each other. Now I should mention the woods are really thick. Now to run in these woods is pretty much impossible. It was almost like it had teleported there silently, slammed the gate just to spook us and run. Then we heard it. It was human in nature but not English, no. It sounds more alien-like. Not a known language. Dave, a hunter for at least 40 years, still can't explain what it is. Anyway, after we heard it, we bolted. He covered me and we ran into my house. Not 10 minutes later, we both heard a loud explosion coming from the woods. It shook our houses and actually flickers our power. I sprint outside to see what it is, but of course, nothing to be seen. And then David comes out and he says he felt the same as before. Moments later, a few strangers from the neighbourhood come to our cul-de-sac, all agreeing that the blast come from behind our home. 911 is called and 2 police officers interview us. Our stories match. The responding officers actually refused to go out there. They do their report and left. To this day, I'm not really sure what that encounter was, and Dave doesn't go out at night anymore. He was that scared. So the next night, earlier in the day, my mother-in-law, a police officer for a town 40 minutes away, installs 2 motion-activated trail cams along the wood's edge. They were brand new. Make sure you keep that in mind. Thinking maybe we'd seen something, we had waited for nightfall. Later that evening, I went outside to feed their outdoor cats. That's when I heard it again. Rustling. This time, not taking any chances, I ran inside and told everybody about what I heard. They all piled by the back door, urging me not to go out. I decide I want to. I grab a flashlight and walk there, to the edge of the woods. Knowing there was a trail cam in this area, I figured if it got me on camera, at least then my sacrifice isn't for nothing. As I got to the wood's edge, I could hear it still rustling. I'm shaking at this point because I can tell I'm maybe 15 yards away from everyone. Everyone at the back door is watching me and can hear this thing. Then it got quiet. For a moment it was gone, or so I thought. Just as I'm scanning my flashlight trying desperately to see, I hear this loud boom sound. Something fell out of the tree and hit the ground so hard it shakes the ground under me. It was so close that I was sure something was going to hit me. I dropped my flashlight and ran 100 yards back to the house in what feels like 2 seconds. I screamed, "Get the hell in now," and everybody scampered in. They heard the thud too. Our neighbour Dave actually decided to call my mother-in-law to ask what the loud crash was. Now, I can't believe he actually heard that from 700 yards away. It's insane to me. Once the adrenaline died down, we realised that this must have happened right next to the trail cam. Problem solved, we got the evidence of this thing. The next morning we checked the SD cards on all the trail cams. They have videos up to 11:47, but the rest is corrupted. They were both brand new cams with SD cards. We reset everything and put them back, but to this day, we've never encountered that creature again, or caught anything on the trail cameras. So, where I'm from, there's this huge stretch of forest preserve that sits in the middle of the city. It's surrounded mostly by sketchy lower-income neighbourhoods, but there's an entrance to it from where I grew up, which is a fairly good place to live. It's as far away from the city as you can get without being in the suburbs, I guess. When I was about 11 or 12, my best friend at the time and I go exploring in the woods because it was a different and interesting landscape than all the sidewalks and school playgrounds and safe places we're used to. Now, the preserve itself wasn't entirely wooded. There were big open lawn areas where people could barbecue in, and big hills where kids would sled in the winter. Now, there's also a paved path that ran through part of it. But since we were dumb and trying to be rebellious, we always tried to stray as far from those areas as possible. Exploring the more deeply wooded areas, it might also be worth mentioning that about 10 years before we started going here, kids from one of the local high schools used these woods as a place to get drunk until someone got stabbed. Then, 4 years earlier, a woman released 2 dangerous pit bulls in the woods because she couldn't take care of them and didn't want them to be put down, and they ended up mauling at least one person and attacking another one. So, knowing all of these things, we still decided it'd be a fine idea for 2 little white girls to just wander around this wooded landscape away from civilization for hours. We did this for almost a whole summer without real incident. Once we stumbled upon a lean-to-type shelter, but no one was home, so we just tried to stay away from that area. But one day we strayed a little further into the woods than we had intended. Things got creepy really quick. We had just been wandering around. We weren't really looking to go anywhere. I started hearing rustling in the ground away behind us. I didn't think too much of it, just thought it was an animal or something. And it didn't sound very frequent, so I didn't think much of it. Then, I suddenly heard something that sounded like a human voice. I froze, and my friend did too. We looked at each other and turned around to see that there's 2 boys probably our age a ways behind us. The 2 things that weirded me out at first are that we're not on a trail. We hadn't been anywhere near one in the last half hour, let's say. What's the chances that we'd see anyone wandering through the massive expanse of this forest? Immediately, I began thinking they're following us. The second thing that creeped me out was the appearance of the second boy. The first kid seemed normal enough, but his friend had a big head. I'm talking big. I noticed it from a distance. His head just like mushroomed up, as though he had something wrong with him or was wearing a mask. It's hard to tell. It's very unsettling to be confronted with this in the middle of nowhere. When my friend and I turned around to look at them, they saw us, but didn't acknowledge us. They just kept talking to each other, walking towards us through the trees. My friend and I are now thoroughly freaked out, deciding now would be a good time to try and head out of the woods. We couldn't turn around because we're afraid that would bring us closer. So we started heading west because we knew it'd eventually lead us to some kind of boundaries. We were making a pretty good pace really, weaving around stumps and around brambles and small shrubs and fallen trees. Every couple of minutes looking behind us to see that our new companions were slowly gaining on us. Now one time when I turned around, I saw the regular looking kid pointing at us, not saying a word. So even more freaked out, we tried to pick up the pace even more, going as quickly as we could without running. I think because we were scared, they started running too. Eventually, we began to see a clearing and a street with houses on it, and we frantically scrambled into it. But about 20 feet from us and freedom is a massive ditch, filled with what looks like a deep stream and countless numbers of large metal trash items. I'm talking like a washing machine, an old 50s style fridge, what appeared to be a rusting coat rack, stuff that you did not want to get cut on, and there's no visible waterline above. Our hearts sank when we saw the obstacles between us and perceived safety. We quickly decided the best idea is to travel along the side of the ditch until we found somewhere to cross. About 5 minutes later, with our friends travelling behind us, we're able to cross a fallen tree to the streets. I look at them while I'm crawling over, and they slow a little. It seems as though they've realised that they can't chase us now. Either way, we're back on the street, feeling safer, but they're still no more than 100 feet away from us. Neither of us had ever been to the neighbourhood we come out on before, but luckily my friend was a lot better with directions than I was, and was able to figure out the streets we needed to take to get home. We ran about 3 miles back to our neighbourhood, sprinting at first, then just jogged the whole way back once we were sure we weren't being followed anymore. We were terrified and it felt as though we were being chased for an hour. My name is John. I live in a rural part of Alabama, but chose to work in the city. The drive is about 45 minutes or so depending on traffic. However, by the time I pick my son up from the sitter, get dinner, and get home, I've been in the car for about 2 hours. My home is surrounded by trees, and the neighbours are few and far between. It can be lonely, but I love the privacy. One evening, I pulled in my driveway and noticed that something's off. The doors on my storage shed are wide open. I tell my son to sit in the car as I go out to investigate. I didn't see anything missing, and close the back doors. I know the wind had not blown them open because there's 2 latches, so you can't just open it. The following day, I look around and much to my dismay, 2 weed eaters along with other garden tools are missing. I know I should have contacted the police, but I know there wasn't much that I could do, and they weren't gonna help. So throughout the week, I had some off time and decided to tackle some yard work that I needed to get done, including cutting down a medium-sized tree that had grown next to my home. Once I cut it down, it took everything I had to move it to the edge of my property just inside the woods. I planned on cutting it off another day. Now fast forward the next week. It's Friday night and I left work at 7, picking up my son, arriving at home at 8:30. As I pull into my driveway, my son and I noticed somebody laying across it. It looked as though a tree branch had fallen across my driveway. As I drove up to it, I thought to myself that there are no trees over my driveway. Once I looked towards the base of my tree, my heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. It was a tree I'd cut down. I put it clear on the other side of my property until I could cut it up. I recognized the marking from my chainsaw. I didn't know what to do. My son and I sat there in silence for at least 5 minutes. I rolled down the passenger driver's side window and just inch in and listen to see if I can hear anyone out there, yet I hear nothing. I then realized in order for me to get to my home, I would have to move the tree. I told my son I was going to get out and move it, just enough so we could get past and I would lock the doors. If anything happened, he could use my phone to call the neighbor who lived the closest. I darted out of my car and moved the tree slightly and raced back to the car. I was terrified. Luckily my son was on the ready to unlock the door for me to get back in. I drove up towards my home and we got in safely. No, I didn't sleep well that night. The next day I wake up to find the trees moved again. This time, a few feet behind my car. To this day I'm still baffled as to who could have done this, or what their intentions were. Next time I'll be smarter and call the police. I do have another question that I can't answer. How did someone know where I put the tree after I cut it down? Whoever did this must have been watching me. I put the tree in the woods. That thought alone is enough to keep me up at night. I'm a 17-year-old male. My girlfriend is 18, and I live on around 150 acres of land in the south. Neighbours are scarce around here. My girlfriend had just finished her senior year of high school, and we'd been planning on spending the summer together since she'd be going college soon, and won't have as much free time. I woke up, then got a pot of coffee like I normally do. I turned on the news waiting for the brewing to finish. I began to feel uneasy, or a sense of foreboding. Something was off and I didn't know what. I finished off my cup of coffee, then hopping in my truck to go and get her. I wasn't exactly excited about going, as I had a bad back, and driving for 20 minutes was going to cause me a lot of discomfort and pain. Now you're probably asking, Why she didn't just drive herself over to my house. Her car was old, having alternator issues. I finally get to her place, she gets her things, and we head back to my home. As I drive down along the long gravel path to my home, I begin to feel that something isn't right. We get back to my home and go inside and get her things situated. My mum had a day off work, so I decided it'd be nice to make us all a big breakfast. I fry up some bacon and eggs, biscuits and gravy. We finish up and my girlfriend and I decide we're gonna head back through the woods to part of the creek that had a small bank covered in sand. Now, if you didn't know, the US is having a problem with feral hogs, so going into the woods without the gun's a bad idea. I grab the shotgun, some rounds, and we get going. As we're walking through the woods, the sense of dread comes back and is worse than before. I almost said we got back home. I wish I did. We get back to the beach, for lack of a better term. Hang around for a while before I say we should probably head home. As soon as I ended my sentence, we heard rustling in the distance and what sounded like snarling or snorting. No creature could make a sound like this. It sounded demented, deranged. We got our shit together and began speed walking back. The rustling and snarling get more frequent the further we walk. Keep in mind that we're walking through dense vegetation. I say probably 10 or 15 feet in front of her through the woods. About halfway back to my home, my girlfriend dropped her beach towels and reaches down to pick it up, and as soon as she does, a man comes sprinting at her full speed from the woods, grabbing her by the hair, snarling what sounded like a mixture of screaming and crying. I can't describe it, it paralyzed me. I was frozen for a split second. Before I continue, I need to describe what the guy looks like. He had long matte brown hair, looked as though he hadn't shaved in a week, and was wearing nothing but jeans that are ripped to hell. I'm 6'4" and 120 pounds, not really the most threatening looking guy. Now back to what I was saying. She started screaming for help. Now I carry a knife on me at all times. I've never actually thought about using it as a weapon. I didn't know if he had rabies or some other disease, so I slung my shotgun off my back and racked the side. If you don't know, just the sound of a shotgun slide can deter people, so that's my mindset. I don't have any rounds loaded or intention of loading any. The man turned around, looks at me with an evil, sadistic smile. For a split second, I thought he was gonna come after me. Thankfully he didn't. He ran back into the woods. I then grabbed my girlfriend and pretty much dragged her the rest of the way home, shotgun in the other hand ready to use. But when we get back to the home, I nearly bust down the door and slam it shut. She starts crying. My mum comes running out and says what happened. I explained everything and she's shocked. You may be asking if we call the police. The answer's no. My family never does that and we try and handle things on our own. We tried to get my girlfriend calmed down. After 30 minutes she finally gets a grip on what had just happened. I tell her it's gonna be alright. We've never went in the woods again since and are terrified of ever going out alone. When I was 13, my best friend and I used to steal metal dust caps off of cars, putting them onto our BMXs because we thought it looked cool. We were just little toe rags back then, and I got used to being chased. So I was fast. My friend, however, was not. Sounds bad to say, but he was even overweight back then. I was the athletic one. Anyway, we would walk around local housing estates stealing dust caps. One night we were bored and decided to go looking for some. We walked up into the housing estate about 15 minutes from where we lived. This was a small estate, nearly fully surrounded by a large wooded area, popular with dog walkers. We get through the estate with no dust caps found, apart from one car at the top of the estate. As I bend down to unscrew the dust cap, I notice a man. Crap, he's looking at us. My friend watches and waits for us. He sees the man go back inside and wait at some bollards at a little pathway facing the woods. As we're leaning against these bollards trying to act normal, I heard the sound of branches breaking. I look up and saw a man's face staring at us from behind a tree at the front of the woods next to the path. I run as fast as I can on instinct before I'd even warned my friend that somebody was there. I just assumed that he'd seen him as well. Anyway, I ran nearly all the way home, but where's my guy? I loiter around near his home. I'm getting worried now. I was really hoping that the guy wouldn't catch up with me. What do I do now? I can't just leave him. I had a slow walk back up near where we'd seen the guy, but I was terrified to go further in case he wanted to chase me or whatever. I decided I was going to go back through the estate and have a look around for him. No sign of him. Where's he gone? I'm terrified now. What if he's been dragged into the woods? I was thinking, I'm gonna have to go and tell his dad. This was my last port of call. As I was walking back, I see my friend fast walking home towards me. Where have you been? Getting these 2 for you and 2 for me. He had 4 skull ones in his hand. They're cool as hell. Did you not see the weird guy in the woods? Yeah. He wanted me to go over to him. He got really weird and started chasing me. Anyway, I ran and got these. So we head home and all is forgotten. Until years later, I move out from my parents' home into my own flat, but in the same estate as my parents. I used to suffer from insomnia. Not the only one. This was when I was around 20 or so. Not the only one. So I used to take my dog on long walks when I couldn't sleep. So one night at around 3 AM-ish, I get my coat and head out with my dog. I ended up walking to the top of this housing estate near where we went all those years ago. As I'm walking around the perimeter of the estate, the dog stops about 20 meters in front of me. I didn't pay much attention until I got closer. Hairs were standing up on the back of my neck. She starts growling, just at the woods. I stopped and got a strong smell of cigarettes as though somebody's right next to me. Needless to say, I sprinted out of there and I've never walked that way again since. I'd been looking for a used road bike on Craigslist for some time now, and a good friend of mine linked me to an ad yesterday that was only 15 miles away and had the exact bike I was after for less than half of what I'd planned to spend. The guy had bought it, used it for half a year, broke his ankle in a freak accident, hadn't used the bike since. I was a little skeptical about the condition as it had supposedly sat for a while. With the photos he sent me, it looked great, so with that, I left for a test drive. I managed to secure this morning for a short 5-miler. I'd leave my truck in his driveway as a collateral. Morning almost passed me by when I slept through my first 2 alarms, only to be drugged from my sleep late by my very last one. I quickly realized what time it was, gathered my cash and my cycling clothes before running out of the door without pants on. I quickly threw a pair of shorts on, heading to my truck. Now Craigslist can lead to some iffy characters, so I've always let someone know where I'm going. This time I texted my mum to give her a heads up. The drive's uneventful, except it put me in a real sketchy neighbourhood across the country. I was less than a mile from the country line, and I didn't really know the area that well, so I was glad that I'd left the extra time when I ended up getting lost. I wasn't truly lost. No one with a smartphone ever is, but I was close. Happily I found the street within a couple of minutes, and I was pulling up beside the houses a couple of seconds later. Like I said, it's a pretty sketchy neighbourhood. I'm somewhat ashamed that I was prepared to tell the guy no if the bike looked stolen. The area looked really scary, and I had looked up a list of local stolen bikes on Craigslist in case the numbers matched. Now after a couple of minutes in the driveway, the door suddenly opened and a huge bull mastiff came charging at me with no leash. My first instinct is to turn and run, and I damn near did. But I remembered from my sister-in-law, who's a veterinarian, that dogs are most adapted to actually chase people and bite them. So instead I stand my ground, making sounds, enough for the dog to actually turn and run. And this is the first experience I have of pulling up there. I don't know if the dog's gonna come at me again, and I suddenly hear the door open and the owner stepping onto the porch. Now, if Pentuino was big, this guy was bigger. He hadn't been sized properly when he brought his bike, because I'm 6 foot and a 56cm bike fits me like a glove. He's probably 6'7" or more. He's every bit of 300 pounds. He walks with a slight limp. I assume from the lingering effects of an ankle injury. Is carried as a Louisville slugger as he approaches me. The dog's linked away from him, beginning to cower in fear behind me, which I have to imagine is comical to see. Every fibre of me wanted me to jump in my truck and drive the hell away and never look back again, until he spoke. He had a higher tenor of a voice that was borderline comical, but actually fit him well. We got to talking a little bit, and I found out that he's a semi-professional singer. He loans his voice out to the local choirs who need someone to fill in a spot during performances, and has actually helped record several soundtracks for a small budget movie. He, much like his dog, was also a huge teddy bear. Shortly thereafter, the dog was greeting him, much like he greeted me. During our conversation, we actually came to the bike, and he talked about how he'd broken his ankle at work. Even with physical therapy, cycling just put too much strain on it. He was hoping to save for a small, above ground pool to help him work on his ankle. His house was split level, and he kept the bike in the basement, which attached to a garage. It was an odd setup, but seeing as how the house was built into the side of a hill, it does make sense, I guess. The basement, however, was something taken straight from the depths of the creepiest horror film I've ever seen. It has an old barber's chair, needles and syringes and small knives. I began to get worried when he must have saw the look in my face and explains that he runs his own small-time tattoo parlor when he has free time. He does piercings as well, but he doesn't have any of those on his person. He proceeds to show me the intricate work that he's done on both of his forearms, as he's wearing a long sleeve to begin with, and noted that he was completely ambidextrous. His work is amazing. He etched a flowing scene of colours, shapes along both of his arms, and it's still in progress. He even had an old computer and printer on the desk by the chair so that his friends could email him designs to check out. Once we enter the actual garage, things begin looking normal. There's an old beat up car, a couple of mountain bikes, an air compressor that appears to be from the 1950s. Finally, I saw a nearly new road bike leaning on the old car. It was in pristine shape, no visible scratches, and didn't have any chain or gear wear that I could see at least. I asked him if I was good to test ride it, and he responded with, "I already pumped up the tyres for ya." I left my truck in the driveway as promised and head out on a short 5-minute loop. I would take about 18 minutes or so. I was precise on timing, and I'd be right back. The bike handle shifted like a dream. Shifted cleanly and probably had a few miles on it. Both sets of gears worked as though they're purchased the next day. I was getting up speed far quicker than I did on my fitness bike. I was planning on doing a few really long rides in the coming weeks. This was certainly going to be a massive upgrade. I was really stoked and already purchased clip-in shoes and pedals, along with a spare tube in case I got flat. After less than a mile, I was ready to buy it. The remainder of the pavement was pure enjoyment. Halfway through, I could see a few high school boys gathering on the road ahead of me. Looked as though they're trying to get the tyres down to block the pathway. I wasn't really familiar with the neighbourhood and with the bike, so I decided to hop onto the grass to go around them. I was moving at a good clip, so I had to be careful. One of them threw something. I realised there's a car tyre rolling directly towards my path. I'm an experienced rider though, with a few thousand miles under my belt. I dodged the slow moving wheels with ease. The boys then chased after me on foot while I bolted for the house. I looked back a few seconds later and they're gone. I did however catch a glimpse of one of them as he blended into the trees, and then I was alone again. Every bend was a new point of terror. I didn't know if I'd run into them again or see them busting out of the woods randomly, so I stared just for a second. Can't see them at all. I decided to book it. I was pushing 25 miles per hour when I rounded the last bend and hopped into the driveway as quick as I could. But the man and the dog are nowhere to be seen. I don't see the kids either. I still wanted to buy the bike, so I slowly entered the garage and walked towards the basement hoping to find him. Several tense minutes go by and there's no sign of him. If I were a dishonest person, I would have just taken the bike and left. I could have even left money for him, but I didn't want to be bait like that, and I'm not a thief, so I waited. I finally heard movement from within the house, so I climbed the wooden stairs to the main floor, tentatively knocking on the door. The movement within suddenly stopped and I heard some scrambling across the floor. I presumed that it was just a dog until the door opened a few seconds later and hits me. I jumped back down one step to avoid the door grabbing something. Looking ahead, I can see one of the boys from earlier at the top of the stairs. Several of them standing underneath, grabbing my ankles. One of them slowly walks past the counter desk with an iron in his hands. This was one of those times I'd love to say that I fought back and knocked several of the attackers out, before busting through the door calling the police, but no. I tried to run. I grabbed the railing and tried to shake my feet free. Fortunately, the railing wasn't as sturdy as it looked and gave out under me. At the first hint of my body weight, it came crashing down off the side of the stairs onto the concrete floor, head first. I black out. After an undermined period of time, I slowly come to, only to see that I had a dark hood over my head. Oddly, my head didn't hurt. I must have blacked out from the fall. I could feel that my hands were bound with rope as well. I could hear voices around me, asking me what they should do with me. Someone muttered, "Bury the last one," and a few people mumbled in agreement. I could see a little bit through the hood and make out half a dozen figures. The man and his dog are nowhere to be found. I hope they'll come back shortly. But I realised that he's in danger too. He may have already met his fate. I tried to remain as inconspicuous as possible and waited for the best opening I could get. I was planning on sprinting back out the main garage door into my truck. I kept a spare key in the lining of the driver's seat. It's not an expensive truck, so I'd never been worried about having it stolen. The kids could have kept my wallet, keys and phone. I'd happily trade them for my safety. I saw a few of them digging through a tool chest and bringing out tools that made metallic clanging sounds. Now this honestly gave me goosebumps. Ready as I was to run, there's always something that can go wrong. At that exact moment, the guy comes home. Maybe he'd gone to look for me. Maybe he'd tried to follow me in another car and make sure I didn't steal the bike. I don't know. But he was walking off into the garage at that exact moment. The boys all stopped talking abruptly, looking up at him. I thought he's gonna start swinging. He says, "Oh good, you got him." I couldn't find him. Didn't want him to get away or anything. My heart sank. The dog's nowhere to be found. But I had to imagine that she'd chase me if I made a run for it. I'd still try though. This might be the only chance I get. I saw the man moving behind a wall in the garage and I took my chance, bolted my feet and was all the way to the garage before I heard the first kid exclaim that I'd moved. Then the guy was right there. I couldn't see and didn't have a chance to get my hands free. Then the man's right in my face. He moved so quick for someone so large. I didn't stand a chance. His bare paw-sized hands grabbed me by the shoulders saying, "Where are you going?" as I shake my head in fear. He sat me down, strapped my arms and legs to the cold metal. It was then I realised that there's a halo above the chair, eerily resembling an electric chair. I can hear the dull hum of high voltage electricity nearby. As if he realised that I noticed that, he nodded and pointed to a large breaker built into the wall. "That's it, I'm gonna die." Suddenly, a guy comes in really close and says, "We're just joking with you." And they all burst out laughing, saying, "We scared the hell out of you." Now these are people that I've never met before, and I still have no idea what's happening or if this is a mind game. I stand up and bolt for my truck. I manage to get in and slam it into gear. I drove away and never went on Craigslist again since.
My bedroom looked bare, so I thought, why not buy a lamp to make it look more cozy and nice? After everything that's happened, I honestly would have just kept my bedroom the same. I'm just an ordinary person. I work, go to university, and keep up with my social life. I never really thought something bad could happen from buying a lamp. It was cheap, the glass was rose gold. It was really pretty and at a good price, so I thought, why not? The first day I brought the lamp, I unpacked it from its packing and placed it in my room in the corner near my chair. I turned it on, admiring it illuminated all around my room. It was pretty late, so most of my lights in my house were turned off. I heard my closet door open as I turned around to exit my room. I'm a strong believer in the paranormal, but I didn't feel any dread or evil. I just felt normal, like nothing was wrong. I walked to my closet and closed the door fully, and walked out my room, not turning back. But I'm sure I heard my closet door open again. I had a few friends around for a girly night in. My friend Katie needed to use the restroom. I moved into my house recently, so she didn't know where anything was. I directed her to the bathroom and carried on talking to my other friends. 20 minutes later, she's still not back, and I go back to check if she's okay. I go up to the bathroom and she's not in there. I search the guest room and she's not in there, so I check in my room and she's in there, staring at the lamp. She was literally on the floor staring at it. I found it pretty weird, but she was probably really drunk. I think everyone was except for me. I walked in and asked her what she was doing. She ignored me at first until I nudged her. Then she just snapped out of whatever she was doing, stood up and walked back downstairs and acted like nothing happened. Before I carry on, I think I should mention some things. I've just turned 20, I'm engaged and I'm also expecting my first child. Me and my fiance Dan recently moved to Europe and bought a cottage. If you've read my previous post about the cottage, then you'll know that I was having problems. Anyway, that's it, and I'll carry on now. So anyway, the next morning Dan asked me if I'd forgotten to turn the lamp off last night. I distinctly remember going to sleep in the dark, but obviously I must have forgotten. Weird things like that happened for a while, but then we started seeing things. Like then the lamp was on and we'd see dancing figures on the ceiling. Even when we were standing perfectly still, they would still be moving, or there would be a figure on the wall just standing there. It wouldn't be our shadows because we would be in a completely different place, and it wouldn't make any sense. One night I was sitting up in bed on the iPad while Dan was in the ensuite. I can't remember exactly what we were talking about. I think it was something to do with his friends, I'm not sure. I noticed the shadow just standing there. I watched it for a good 5 minutes, then it moved. But it didn't move on the wall. It's like it was walking towards me. I was so engrossed I didn't call for help. I turned to Dan in disbelief, but he was just frozen. We could hear heavy breathing. It reached the bed and then just disappeared. The floor was still creaking. I can't remember much of what happened next, but I do remember seeing a hand peer out from under the bed. It was bony and black. It was clawing its way out. And then I saw Dan running over to the lamp. He picked it up and smashed it against the wall, and then we were there in the dark. This happened last week. Nothing else has happened so far. I don't think the lamp was the problem. Please, if you do see a cheap lamp on Craigslist, no matter how beautiful it is, do not buy it.
I had to buy a new car off of Craigslist. There was an elderly gentleman that was getting rid of his old daily driver. He said he loved the thing, but never got to use it, and he was far too old to be driving around anymore. He seemed normal enough when I spoke to him on the phone. So, off I headed. As I was driving, I get a text message from him saying, "Oh, I've left the keys under the door, just let yourself in. I might be asleep, so you'll have to wake me up." Weird, yes I know, but at the time I wasn't really thinking of it, more concentrating on driving. When I arrived to the location, it's truly in the middle of nowhere. The sounds of nature are everywhere, yes, but people? No. It's one of the oldest houses I've ever seen, looking like dropping a match on it could let the whole thing go up in flames. Kinda hard to describe, but literally like something straight out of a horror flick. So I pull up to his driveway. There's no sign of him. He must be asleep. I guess that's where he's old. I look at my phone again and he says, "I'm just inside, just come let yourself in. Just make sure you check under the mat for the key." Now I get a weird feeling about this. I go to the mat anyway, and when I lift it up, there's just a piece of paper. I didn't think there was actually words on it at first, but upon closer inspection, in really bad handwriting it says, "You better start running." Needless to say, I noped it the hell out of there. I bolt back to my truck without even looking back. I speed away from the driveway, and as I look in the rearview mirror, I can see multiple people coming out from the surrounding trees, all in black. I have never been on Craigslist since and still have some PTSD to this day about going to unknown locations.
Last year, when I was moving from my apartment to my house, I dropped my box with my laptop and it was damaged beyond repair. I definitely didn't have the money for a new one, so I went on Craigslist to find a cheap deal. After hours of searching for one that was decent and affordable, I found a Windows 10 for only $25. I was astonished and emailed the owner right away in hopes it hadn't been brought as such a good deal. I was in good luck because they miraculously hadn't sold it yet. I was ecstatic and went to pick it up. I asked the man why he was selling it for so cheap, and he said his sister had recently passed away and they were cleaning out her house, so they were selling different things from her house. It didn't creep me out too much that I was using a dead person's computer, but I felt weird that they were giving up her belongings so quickly. I brought the computer home and was excited to use it, so I plugged it in right away and it started loading after a minute. It was crazy. The computer was in perfect condition, not even a scratch, and was loading surprisingly fast. When it started up, the background popped up and it was a pitch black screen with 3 letters that read EMX. I didn't know what it meant, but I suppose she had worked for an obscure company. I wondered if she cleared off the files from her computer, and being the nosy person I was, checked the On This PC tab for files. I didn't find anything at all until I checked the Documents tab. There were just 3 items there. The first item read, Case 322 Experiment. I clicked the first open, and it came up a summary of the little experiment of Case 322.
Case 322. Notes. Case suffers severe schizophrenia and depression, and experiences frequent hallucinations and paralysis. We will be experimenting with treatments for her unique and unusual case. It should be noted that this case is extremely violent, has been speculated at the most violent of all cases. Constant murder and torture threats, surprising detail, and graphic descriptions for someone as young as her.
That was the end of the item. I was horrified by the fact that it appeared they'd given me a computer formerly used for children's neurology experiments. Being the curious person I was though, I decided to keep reading on. The biggest mistake of my life. The second item read,
Safety/concern. Forewarn.
I opened the file and it appeared to be a list.
Safety concerns of Case 322. It should be noted that those children for experimentation on Case 322 shall be the utmost high standards, and serious precautions must be taken. Case 322 has been involved in the following acts. 1. The murder of her entire family. 2. The murder of 4 civilians during an escape from her home. 3. Bank robberies. 4. Over 200 death threats towards figures of authority. Police, guards, doctors, therapists, teachers, school staff and others. 5. Writing a death note to a classmate. 6. Pulling out her own hair from her roots and eating it. 7. Pulling her teeth out and stabbing herself in the eye with it. 8. Over 20 suicide attempts including hanging, overdose of drugs, self-inflicting shots with a firearm, jumping off the top of a building and stabbing herself. 9. Attacking a police officer and nearly killing them. As expected, this is not the full list of offences, but are the most prominent. When conducting experiments, do not leave Case unattended and do not take your eyes off her. Keep eyes to experimentation room out of her parameters and make sure she's restrained in a straitjacket through the whole process. Have guards on duty at all times for experimentation.
And that was the end of the file. I then understood they weren't dealing with a normal messed up kid. They were dealing with a serial killer, a psychopath. I was sick to my stomach at this point. Why did this woman have such private matters on her at-home computer? How did her family not know about this? Why was she dead? The third file read,
Experimentation, documentation. Day 1. Case 322 fought and screamed until she sedated. She is surprisingly strong for her stature and being only 14. Experiments went on, not much progress. Day 2. Case 322 stabbed a guard in the eye with a bobby pin. Case is no longer allowed utilities. Cases have head shaved to prevent it being used as a noose. After proper sedation, we found a serious neurological phenomenon in her brain, most likely the cause of her issues. Day 3. Case 322 woke up from sedation during experiments and played asleep as she slowly attempted to escape from the strain. Patients sprung up in the middle of the experiment, tackled a doctor and broke their hip bone before being restrained by the guards. Doctor to receive compensation. Sedation will be amped up several milligrams and restraining methods are to be more advanced. Day 4. 2 guards and a nurse were killed in an escape. Building was put on lockdown. Case was found hiding in the cleaning closet. Day 5. Experiments are becoming increasingly more dangerous for a team. We're debating the end of the experiment for safety reasons. Case 322 is by far the most severely, and please excuse my improper tone, messed up and psychotic case ever speculated by our team. Day 6. Case 322 is no longer allowed fingernails. Day 7. I know I'm about to die, but if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna make sure these last few things are documented. She killed the rest of the team, and I'm hiding in my locked office. But she's close. I can hear her footsteps. We never figured out how to treat this phenomenon. This is rarely ever, possibly never said in this field, but this case is absolutely helpless. There is no cure. She's a lost cause. She's picking the lock right now. If my family ever finds this, I love you guys. And Case 322 is out there somewhere. She's in Goodbye World. This is Case 322. Well, that's just what they call me. I killed this piece of trash. Bleach blonde waste of life. She's dead. If her family's reading this, I enjoyed banging her head against the desk until she died. I love watching the life drain from my victims. And good luck ever finding me. I'm dropping her laptop off at her house so they can't use it for evidence. I know where she lives, and I'll find you too.
and then it ended. I shut off the computer and went straight back into the man's house. I asked him how his sister died. He seemed to be taken aback by the question, but answered saying she was murdered. I gave him the computer and showed him the files. We turned it into the police station, and there's been an ongoing search ever since. Everyone in the area is told to keep their doors locked at all times. Keep on lookout for the girl. She's out there somewhere. They still haven't found her. I still have no clue what EMX is. The only thing that really still keeps me paranoid is the ending. And I'll find you too. Honestly, based on the description of how crazy she is, I can't tell you I don't believe her.
If there's one piece of advice I can give anyone, it's don't take the cheap way out, no matter how good it seems. Something about that decision will bite you. You might be lucky, it may only be a mosquito bite, but if you're not, it could be a great white shark bite. For me, I wasn't so lucky. Obviously, I wouldn't be writing to you today. A couple of months ago, I got in a very bad accident. It was so bad that my car got totaled almost beyond recognition. My insurance company gave me a decent amount of money for it, but money was tight for me. I needed a car fast. I went to the place everyone goes looking for a good deal, Craigslist. For a day, I kept looking for a deal I couldn't say no to. I needed a decent running car for cheap, that's also reliable. All the sellers at the time were asking for fair prices, too fair for me to get them. I was about to give up one night when I come across a deal I couldn't say no to. The guy Robert was selling a 2001 Camry with 100,000 miles on it, claiming it had run smoothly for a good price. I contacted Robert and he told me I could test drive it the next day. I took a taxi out there and gave the car a good old drive. Let me tell you, it ran like it was brand new. No complaints with the car whatsoever. I was really impressed. It seemed almost too good to be true. So when I got back, I asked the dealer what was wrong with the car. No matter how hard I pushed, he said there was nothing wrong with it. He seemed genuine about it the entire time too. So I believed him, buying it on the spot. I had the car for about a month without incident. Then one night, I was driving home from a long day of work. It was about 1 in the morning, so as you can imagine, the roads were desolate. I'm smoking a cigarette with my windows down, listening to the wind fly into my car. I remembered being stopped at red lights when a chill ran down my spine. This made me uneasy, but I blew it off as exhaustion. The light turns green. I begin to accelerate. Then something or someone whispers into my ear, ever so slightly. The sound of the engine mixed with the wind made it almost inaudible. There were no cars around, so I slammed my brakes, bringing my car to a complete stop. I waited a couple of seconds for maybe another whisper or anything, but no, nothing. No incident occurred for the rest of the ride. The next 2 weeks went by without anything like it happening again. I mean, honestly, I almost completely forgot about it. That's until something happened again. It was pouring rain while I was at work. It was very slow, so my boss lets me smoke a cigarette in my car. When I get in my car, I got the same chill once again. Instantly, I remember my last experience sat in there. I'm now in complete silence, waiting for something to happen. About 30 seconds later, my car got filled with the smell of freshly shot fireworks. It got so bad, so quick it made me cough like crazy, gagging even. I got out of my car, running back inside. The look on my face must have been far from normal, because my boss comes up to make sure everything's alright. I told him about the smell, and he said the only thing he could think of was somebody messing with my car. We went out to check out what was wrong, but the smell was gone. He said he's going to check the cameras, but he never found anything. I tried to blow it off again, but this time I couldn't find a reasonable explanation. After an hour straight of thinking about what could have happened, I tried to give Robert a call. Sadly, this guy had the nerve to cancel his phone. About a week later, I just got into an apartment to deliver a pizza. It's going pretty routine. The guy's cool, gave me a nice tip. I even had a good conversation with him. As I was about to wrap things up and head out, I noticed something that caught my attention in the parking lot. "Hey, you drove that Camry here, right?" he said. "Yeah, why?" "I think there's someone in your car." I look at my car and sure enough, I see a girl sitting in shotgun. She had black hair, was very pale, wearing a dress. Crap, call the cops. For a few seconds I thought, I wasn't crazy. and I finally got the person messing with me. Sadly, this wasn't the case. When I was on the 3rd floor, the girl was looking forward while I faced her side. I lost sight of her going down the stairs to the 2nd floor, but saw her again as I got down, and let me tell you, I nearly fainted. She was staring directly at me with a smile from ear to ear. But that's not the worst part. Her eyes were something else. They looked kind of blue but almost black around the outside, something I've never seen before. I was mesmerized and terrified. The next thing I know, I feel a tap on my shoulder, breaking my trance. It was a guy I delivered the pizza to, informing me that the police are on their way. He said to me, "Why is I standing there?" I explained, looked back, but the girl's gone. The police ended up coming. We filed the report and they did a quick search through my car to see if there's any signs of a break-in. Sadly, there's none. Everything's in place exactly as I left it. The police said they would check the cameras and inform me if they see anything, but they never spoke to me. Over the next couple of weeks, I would hear the damn whispering again, but only when my car or something in my environment made a loud noise. At first it was occasional, but by the 2nd week, it was there almost every loud sound. I could also make out separate voices now, one of a man and one of a woman. I still couldn't understand what they were saying. That was until I was on my way home tonight. A few minutes from my house, I got a chill again. I knew it was coming. This time, I heard it so clear. It's your turn now. I felt ice cold breath running down my neck. In my peripheral vision, I could see her reflection in my rearview mirror waiting for me to turn and look. She kept whispering them damn words in my ears, almost creating a thick layer of ice on my neck. The longer she whispered, the more it felt as though I was being pulled into her influence. Finally, I got home, ran inside, locked myself in my room, but I'm starting to think I was making a mistake. If I were to look out my window, I could see my car and hear the whispering again. There's 2 girls and 1 guy. They kept telling me to look at the car just one more time, really quick. Maybe I should look. I mean, what's the worst that's gonna happen to me? This happened 6 years ago. I was about 12. My brother was 26 at the time. My brother had been serving in the US Army for several years when this happened, and was deploying to the Middle East on his 2nd deployment if I remember correctly. Also of note was that he's a Green Beret and had recently completed the Army Special Forces qualification course. And by then, was an active duty SF engineer sergeant. Given that we'd both grown up with a passion for the outdoors, he thought it'd be nice to take me on a backpacking trip in northern Alabama before he left for 9 months. The trip had gone smoothly up until the 3rd night we were camping out. Around 8 PM, we had our camp set up, eaten dinner, and were sitting by the fire talking about typical gun stuff, girls, etc. For reference, our spot was about 50 yards from a large stream, and about 50 yards downhill adjacent to the large path. Our camp, the stream, and the path formed a kind of triangle. This was summertime in Alabama, so it wasn't quite dark yet when 2 guys, who appeared to be in their late 20s, wandered up, asking if we'd seen any hogs while hiking. Given that this is rural Alabama, We had seen some further into the wilderness and told them so. Even though they were relatively polite, I got a seriously creepy vibe from them dirty clothes, greasy hair, bad facial hair, etc. I think they probably looked as though they belonged in the movie Deliverance. They kind of hung out for a few minutes, maybe a little longer than they should have, looking around, asking us questions like, how long have we been out here? How long are we staying? And just kind of sizing us up. They then abruptly said goodbye and walk away. I didn't necessarily feel threatened by them, and I know for sure my brother didn't, but I still felt uneasy about the whole thing. Fast forward 3 or 4 hours, my brother and I had gone to sleep and were nestled in our tent when I was awoken by the sound of multiple dogs barking. I've always been a heavy sleeper, and they sound as though they're only 100 yards away. My heart immediately starts pounding, and I kicked my brother through my sleeping bag and asked if he was awake or heard the dogs. He responded, "I'm awake. They've been getting closer for the past hour or so just lay still." Needless to say, I'm terrified. We would also hear sporadic shouts from several different sources, but neither came any closer. A few minutes later, my brother whispered, "They're hunting for dogs." Don't worry, they're just hunting for hogs. They use the dogs to pin them down before they shoot them. This gave me some relief, but not too much. Somehow I managed to fall asleep again. The fact that they were doing this during night time was a huge red flag to me. Fast forward what was probably another 3 hours, around 2 AM. I managed to sleep pretty well after hearing the first hog hunters when I woke up to my brother squeezing my hand firmly saying, "Wake up, put on your shoes and follow me, be quick." My heart immediately went back to racing because I heard the dogs and voices in the distance, further away than before but very distinct. Not asking any questions, I did what he said, and as soon as we're out of the tent, he says get back. We snuck about 50 yards into the woods, towards the junction of the path and the stream, crawled into the bushes. It was up a hill, so we had a pretty good elevated view of the campsite. I remembered as we're laying there how loudly I was breathing and how quietly he was when I heard a very distinct sound of a pistol slide racking. I look over to my brother and his hand pistol, and he was watching the campsite and surrounding area. I begin whispering to him, and he puts his hand over my mouth and points at the campsite. The group of hunters have been steadily approaching our campsite by this time, and have now reached it. This is over the course of 30 minutes. There were 5 of them, and like 3 or 4 dogs, they all looked crazy, and are relatively young with either rifles or shotguns. For those of you who are backpackers and campers, you know nobody comes up on a random camp in the middle of the night with dogs and guns that has good intentions. I knew this, and so does my brother. I was freaking out, and so was my brother. Now they lingered for maybe 20 minutes, shining flashlights around, talking to themselves when my brother put his mouth to my ear and said, "If they come towards us, I want you to run as quickly as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back. stay off the trail, and look for flashing lights. I knew I could make it back because he had taught me the land nav pretty well. He then handed me a flashlight and told me not to take the red filter off. He told me later that the red filter helps preserve night vision, cutting down ambient light so it's harder for someone to see you from a distance. By now, I was so scared I started crying, but at the same time, I had a rush of adrenaline and what I think now was confidence that he thought I could handle myself. We lay there for a while longer when out of nowhere they start screaming, "Where are you all at?" Firing at random in the woods. My brother dragged me back behind the crest of the hill, throwing himself on top of me. Thankfully our position on top of the hill is protected from any gunfire. They shot maybe 6 or 7 times, then started walking in the direction they come from. They got maybe 100 yards away when I heard a blaring siren, seeing emergency lights flashing through the woods. Turns out, my brother called the forest services on a satellite phone, and my family had it for emergency services, and had actually sent out to the forest services and game wardens to our area of the wilderness. The wilderness is about 25,000 acres across, so it took them a while to get there on the dirt roads. When we saw the game warden truck, my brother signalled them with the light and pointed them in the direction that the hunters had gone, and the other guy had sped off through the woods. As soon as they're all gone, we went back to our camp, packed up our stuff and waited by the path for the game warden to come back, who then gave us a ride in his truck. On the drive back, my brother told me how brave I'd been and that we couldn't talk about it to our parents the next day if I wanted to. I asked him not to do that because I know they'd never let us go camping again. When I was about 18, me and some friends took a trip about 7 hours or so down to the Appalachian National Forest near Tallahassee, Florida. We were going to do a little car camping, drink a few ice cold natty lights. As such, we didn't want to get bothered by any park rangers, so we drive way deeper into the woods. We get there, set up camp, had said natty lights, and me and a guy decide to do some exploring. So we walk about 100 yards from our campsite to the main road. We see another path directly across from us and start walking. Immediately, we started seeing signs that someone had lived there for a while. Big bags of trash, stuff like that. Shouldn't have been a huge red flag to turn around, but, you know, we're young, nothing can hurt us. So eventually we get to the campsite of an older white guy living out of his van. Clothing line strung up, coolers placed around it, and a big gorgeous dog. I think it's maybe a golden retriever. We tried to back out, but he sees us and begins talking. He's friendly enough, asking where we're from, tells us some cool spots to check out in the park. We end up chatting to him for about 10 minutes and go on our way. I kept thinking to myself how odd it was that he gave directions in steps, not in yards or miles. The guy always seemed off balance too, not drunk, like he's on a balancing beam or something swaying a lot. And he was super excited to talk about national parks and forests where we're from. Okay, camping part's over. We go back to our tents. Now fast forward 2 months, somebody calls me last night and tells me to turn the TV on. I oblige. I then see an old dude in a van. You see where I'm heading with this. I get annoyed at my friend and say, "Why'd you wake me up for this?" He says, "No, watch." And I see the golden retriever and it all clicks. What the hell? The guy's name is Gary Mitchell Hilton, convicted of at least 4 murders. He kidnaps and murders a girl on Blood MTGA, an older couple, and a girl in the Appalachian, not far away from where we saw him. Obviously we called the cops and they put us in touch with the FBI, and we get flown down to take investigators to the campsite. We point out every spot we saw anything and tell them exactly what happened, show them the places he describes to us. Now, I didn't think anything would come out until after the trial, but apparently they found what appeared to be partially destroyed human finger bones in and around the campsite. My family used to camp in Alcuin Park in Ontario when I was a kid. We used to do a lot of day hikes with our dog. Now the dog was a crazy runner and would run up and down the trail, back and forth between my parents, brother and I. This one trail ended at a lookout. My brother and I stepped to try and take in the view. My dog arrived a minute later, travelling at full speed. He attempted to apply the brakes, but the momentum carries him over the edge. We freak out thinking that our dog's gone off a cliff with maybe a 70-foot drop. I ventured over to the edge to look, and my dog somehow landed on a ledge which is only 10 feet down. Now what? Any movement and my dog's gonna fall the rest of the way down. It's a sheer-faced drop with no way to get there, and out of the blue appears a hiker with full climbing gear. Now this area is not known for a lot of climbing, and I've never seen anything like it before. The guy goes down, rescues the dog. Now he's right next to us and we go to look at our dog, turn back to say thank you, and he's literally vanished. He doesn't even say a word to us. This happened to me some time ago, back when I was 10, on a school field trip to a group of cabins some 70 kilometers or so away from the city I lived in. The point of the trip was basically to have fun. We weren't being taught much other than how to make shelters and light a fire in rain. For the most part, we're supposed to spend the majority of the time just fooling around, playing tag and swimming in the nearby lake, and maybe playing board games inside the cabins when it's pouring. Things turned out to be less than fun. At first it seemed to be a great trip. We got to choose our roommates, and my group of friends and I obviously chose one together. So there's 4 of us. Myself, an Indian guy, Canadian and Chinese. Neither of us had ever been on a trip like this before, so far from home in the middle of the mountainous terrain. When we got there, we took a tour which was led by the camp's coordinator. This 20-something-year-old with blonde shoulder-length hair. He shows us the cabins, the lake, the trails, and the kitchen/lunchrooms, and then stressed to us that it's so important not to wander far from the cabins since, being in a forest at the base of a mountain, the chances of getting lost are relatively high. So we finished the tour, ate dinner, and then were guided to bed. As we had arrived somewhat late, my friends and I were extremely excited, with this being our first time sleeping away from home and everything. The Canadian friend had the seemingly brilliant idea to share ghost stories while we got ready for bed. We each come up with a fictional character that will creep out kids or murder people or something. I came up with this idea of someone called Psycho, who would hide behind the shower curtains and then stab you when you stepped inside. Another guy come up with the typical monster under the bed that grabs you, dragging you under the bed. As the hour passed, the lights out drew closer. We started to get the creeps. By the time lights out hit, the next 2 hours were so high-strung with a combination of excitement and nerves that everyone, excluding me, decided to share one bed, even though there's 2 of them. The guy's story about being dragged under the bed unnerved us to the point that we jumped onto the beds from nearby pieces of furniture rather than walk near the bottoms. As I previously mentioned, I decided to sleep on my own because 3 people in one bed was awkward and it's hot. We talked for a bit before turning off the lights and falling asleep, but I was awoken some hours later by what sounds like whispering. I didn't move at first, since the stories we had shared while getting ready for bed were still on my mind. Then I recognized the voices and realized my friends were the ones whispering from over the other side of the room in their bed. So I relaxed for a moment and was about to call out and ask what they were doing when someone hissed to me, "What is it doing?" Immediately I thought of some monster looming over my bed. I freeze, eyes darting around in the darkness. I didn't see anything, as the room was empty, and it's just too dark to be able to really see anything. I'm now starting to panic a little bit. Someone else speaks. It was looking at him, said the Chinese guy, then adding, "Do you think it'll break the window?" And then I look at the window. It was one of those floor-to-ceiling ones with the latch that opens up to the balcony. Standing up to the balcony, pressed against the glass, was a silhouette of a person. The curtains were drawn, but they were white and thin, and we could see the wrapped shadow of a person, illuminated from the dim moonlight. The man was holding a long pole with a wide end, similar to a sledgehammer or axe. "Guys?" I whispered. The man outside didn't move, but the Chinese guy did. I don't even know how he worked up the courage to do this, but he crawled out of bed and slowly worked his way to the side of the window, ducked down low, all commando style. He reaches forward, grabbing the curtains, and was about to peek between the fabric when the man outside knocks on the glass. The poor Chinese guy jumps up so badly that he pulled on the curtain, causing the entire thing to rip off the railing, letting us see the person outside. He was dressed in black, aside from a pair of orange shorts, having a ski mask on. What he held in his hands was actually a shovel, rather than a hammer or axe. Nevertheless, the 4 of us were terrified. The Chinese guy screamed and bolted for the door in less than a second. The 4 of us were scrambling out of bed and hightailing it for the exit, screaming all the while. The Indian guy tripped along the way. The Chinese guy is in such a rush that he slams into the door, causing the lock to nearly snap. In seconds, We're in the cabin's lobby. Everyone's rushing out of their room trying to say what happened. A teacher goes out to try and investigate, but found nothing. The person's disappeared. After that, it took an hour before we were convinced enough that we could even step back in our room. I clamber into bed with my friends, despite their protest, and we stay awake for the remainder of the 4 hours or so, hands clutching our flashlights and the curtains open. The next day passes normally, and we thought that we talked about the event and that everything would be forgotten about soon. We eat lunch, eat dinner, and then with a small sense of dread walk back to the cabins ready for nighttime. The same guy came back, but to a different cabin this time. When we wake up, and we get herded into the breakfast hall, and there's a group of girls talking about the man with the shovel. We soon realised that I'd seen the same person. Now nothing else happened after this. At the time we were freaked out. Looking back on it now, I know that that guy was really messed up, whoever it was, and I'm glad that nothing further come of it, and that they couldn't actually get inside to us. No, I'm not a camper or ranger, but an archaeologist. A few years back, we're doing a massive survey in the middle of nowhere in the interior of BC. All the crew had gone home. It's just my boss and myself left for a few days to follow up and confirm some coordinates and finish off some mapping. We head out from our motel an hour or so into the bush. Middle of nowhere along deactivated login roads. The closest town is miles and miles away. We hike out to this one area we had found a couple of weeks previously. For some reason the whole area felt off, so we get down to business, and about 15 minutes after being hunched over mapping, there's a really weird deafening whomp sound. I could feel the pressure in my ears change. I immediately look at my boss 20 feet away, and he's white as a ghost staring back at me. It happens again. I feel the pressure in my chest now. There's chills all over my body. Every hair is standing on end. My boss just turns and looks at me and says, "Let's go." We grab all our stuff and speed hike back to the truck. We never discussed it since. I have no clue what it was, but I've never been so freaked out in my life. All throughout the 1980s, I spent a lot of time with my dad and his friends riding dirt bikes in an unpopulated area of Maricopa County, California called Dogtown. The area was dotted with old abandoned gold mines and fire roads. There's quite a few areas with isolated residents. My dad and his friends would often talk about avoiding a certain resident where the occupant would chase off the riders. We actually rode past this place once, and there were two men that rushed out of the house, letting dogs off on us. We were luckily able to get past them and escape. Now, I never gave it much thought until the early 90s when I was working in the fire service. Some of my co-workers were former CDF firefighters, now called CAL FIRE, and once, when we were up in that area on our day off, they were talking about the hermit killer who lived down a certain road. It was the same guy that chased us off, and his name was JG. According to my co-workers, he had been accused of killing his neighbours who had a quarrel with him. But it can never be proven, even though he supposedly bragged about it. Investigators supposedly found barrels of acid on his property, and it's believed that's how he hid the bodies. Another firefighter friend worked at a remote forest station called Kingsley. One night, He and his fellow firefighters heard an engine revving outside. They walk out and find JG pulling out a body from his little S10 pickup, throwing it onto the station lawn, yelling, "I killed him in self-defense," and driving off. I don't actually remember the outcome of that incident, but apparently he was not charged. In 1987, there was a huge fire that raged for months called the Stanislaus Complex Fire. During one of the daily briefings, JG drove up and personally threatened the incident commander if his house isn't saved. Another firefighter I knew that JG would drive to San Francisco and pick up teenage runaways, bring them by his place, and they'd never be seen again. He was described to me as looking like a dirty Santa Claus in a Chevy S10 pickup. Once, about 13 years ago, I spent the day riding in an area called Anderson Valley, which was pretty close to JG's area. When we were leaving for the day and almost back at the main road, I saw a Chevy S10 pickup going down towards Dogtown. It was driven by a dirty Santa Claus looking guy, and there's a teenager in the passenger seat. I recently spoke to the firefighter who worked at Kingsley, and he said that JG probably died as he's very old now. I want to start off by saying I was between the ages of like 10 to 12 when this happened. I don't remember exactly what year it was. I'm in high school now, so it was a few years ago. At my old apartment building, the parking lot was a circle. There was a staircase off the parking lot down to a cement platform where kids could play, down to a sidewalk, and there's some area for playing sports in. There was a staircase off the grass/platform that led to a path into the woods. Cracked asphalt led through the woods to the other side of the neighborhood, which was regular single-family homes. Now one day, a man walks out of the woods and up both flights of stairs. He was wearing a full-body black Grim Reaper-style cloak, making circles around the parking lot. My mum, who was a single mum, made the wise decision to not run any errands until he left. Hours had passed now, 4 p.m, 5 p.m, 6 p.m. Cloakman was still there, looping by the parking lot. By this time, the sun is setting. My dad came to pick me up after dinner to go to his house. When we got back, guess who was there? Cloakman. The sky was black. The man was shrouded within the darkness. The HOA sucked, and all the streetlights are burnt out. Our headlights actually illuminate him as we drove by. I saw him more clearly this time, his head bowed, the cloak completely covering his face. Hours passed now. By the time I went to bed, Cloakman was still wandering. He had been wandering the parking lot for the entire day. When I tell you this man was walking for at least 12 hours, that would not be an exaggeration. I wake up the following day, and there's literally no trace of him whatsoever. I still don't know who he is or what he wanted. I just hope I never have to see him again. So this didn't happen to only me, but my uncle too. I must clarify this. This was after Christmas Eve, and we went to a party. Everyone went home. I decided to stay, because my cousin and I are watching a movie. My uncle, who used to walk his dogs in the woods next to a park, went to take them out. Before this, my aunt told him that you shouldn't do this because it's too dark out there, literally 5 a.m. He didn't care. He went off anyway. My auntie was still worried, so I went along with him. Now nothing seems too off so far, just it's really quiet here. So, my uncle and his dogs are usually having a relaxing walk. Now I'm not really paying much attention to the surroundings when suddenly, the dog goes still. This isn't strange, they always stop and have a look at things around them. But, my uncle and I noticed that something isn't right. The dogs weren't angry or curious, just anxious and afraid. The largest one was actually shaking and growling. Now it's not even a confident growl, almost I don't know what's gonna happen kind of growl. As my uncle started to get worried about the situation, we hear it. People in the woods. We didn't know how many we saw because of how dark it is, but we can hear them saying, "We all gather by the blood of we, thee, and thy." As my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs to follow him in a hushed tone. We quickly get out of the woods. We look back and see some movement in the branches off to the shrubs. These people are trying to hide and watch us now. After all that has happened, he hasn't walked his dogs near the woods or in darkness ever again. Me and my brother were on a mission together one day to go and locate an old house on our property. Now, my family had miles and miles of land. Much of it was forested and much of it was unexplored. It was dangerous to go out there alone in case you got lost or trapped. I mean, you could easily break your leg on something and not be able to get back for hours or days. But still, being outside was nothing new to us. When we both set off, we were both pretty young in our early 20s and didn't bother bringing our cell phones because we had walkie-talkies. We had some lights on us and a couple of torches, but not much else. We had a rough idea of where the property was. We had been informed by our parents that there were squatters there and it was our job to go and investigate. Because it is our land and somewhat feeling brave, we set off towards night. We are looking forward to the cool air and the moonlight. Now, as we were getting close to where we think the site is, we both stop hearing this weird screechy kind of sound. We're not fazed by it because we know that it's a weird animal out there. So we continue on. Now, I didn't say it to my brother, but I can't shake the feeling of us being followed or watched. I eventually mention it to him and he says he feels the same. We've realised roughly where we should be and eventually find it. And wow, great, there have been squatters here. There's graffiti everywhere. Now the building's old, but it looks like it's been ruined by them. It annoys us because we know it's going to be a challenge keeping them out. All we can do is board up the windows and doors and hope they don't return. Now while we're standing in there, we think that my dad's come. We radio him on the walkie-talkie, but only hear static in reply. What more is my brother's doesn't work. We call out and say, "Dad, you're right about this," but get no reply. We're confused because out the window we can clearly see somebody watching us. We come back down and call out for him again, but he's moved now. We think maybe he's headed back and can't hear us, so we start walking that way. We're maybe only 10 meters away from the house when we turn back and can see that someone's watching us through the window. We think it's our dad playing a prank on us, so we shine our torch to blind him. But the second we do so, the figure immediately vanishes. Now, I've never felt fear like it in my life. I let out a blood-curdling scream, dropped my walkie-talkie, and me and my brother sprint all of the way back. When we get there, our dad's waiting for us at the table asking why we look so scared. I used to work in a hole-in-the-wall gas station out in the sticks of Northern Carolina. I was freshly 18, had a crappy car, being newly promoted to assistant manager. So I was working many late shifts by myself. Now truthfully, I love to work alone. My boss is very laid back, and his philosophy was, as long as the work gets done, do whatever you want. Plus, we had a gun at the counter, which he taught me to shoot on my first day there. So even if I was there on my own, I felt safe. Now on this one particular night, it was extremely dead, so with my boss's permission, I closed the store early, hopping in my car. It was probably 11:30 to 12 AM by now. Other than being able to get out of work so early, this is my usual routine. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. I texted my roommate to let her know I was getting home early, so I light up a cigarette, then started my way home. For those of you who don't know North Carolina like me, I'm going to provide a little bit of background about the terrain. From where I worked at the gas station to where I lived, I had to drive down the back roads. These roads consisted of very dense woods on both sides. Sometimes, the woods were so thick, you couldn't tell where you were, especially at night. This could be intimidating for those who don't know the area, but honestly, I was worried about deers jumping out in front of me. But on this night, I wished it was just a deer. I'm driving down the road, blaring Navara, and just being a typical 18-year-old grunge kid. And I suddenly see something in the middle of the road, probably about 7 to 100 feet ahead. I think it's a deer. It looked too small to be a deer though, so I started the slow, gradual way down. I have to wear glasses when I drive, mainly at night, but my eyesight isn't terrible enough for me to make a habit of it. I grabbed my glasses and put them on, now being able to see much more clearly. I'm terrified by what I see. It was a woman, an older one, wearing what appears to be a nightgown of some kind. Her hair was in disarray. She had her hands behind her back and was staring at me in the middle of the road, staring at my car. Let me remind you though, this is literally the middle of nowhere. There are trees as far as my headlights can shine, and it's midnight. I'm naturally paranoid, so all kinds of thoughts rush through my head. Why is she here? What does she want? And my door's locked. And why is she out here? I honk my horn at her, but she doesn't reply. Now, I just sit there contemplating what to do with my phone out, but I realise I have no service. Now, this encounter went on for a while, just sitting in the middle of the road, mentally questioning what to do. It's now way past midnight. She's still standing there, just staring at me with this zoned out look, hands behind her back, as if she's observing me. I'm starting to get tired of this, considering that I had to be up early for work the next morning. So I honked my horn at her. I didn't expect what happens next. The woman's face turns from being spaced out to complete rage. She raises her arms up, looking like she was hiding something in her hands, lets out this horrid scream, charging on my car. As she ran closer, I realised she's holding something sharp. It looked like a knife or jagged piece of glass. During this moment of horror, I had a brief flashback to my dad giving me advice when I first got my license, which is, if an animal ever runs out in front of you, turn it into a bump bump. I love animals, so I couldn't bear to hear that, but now I think of his advice. Now, I hit the gas. She was running towards my car like she's gonna jump on the hood. I guess she realised I had the utmost intent to hit her, at which point she zigzags away from me and runs off into the woods. I'm still in flight mode, I didn't question what this woman wanted or where she went. I was glad she was gone and sped the whole way home. I got home at 1:30 and my roommate's still awake, waiting for me the entire time. She's extremely worried because it's way past when I should be back, and she's been calling and texting me. My roommate's aunt was a 911 operator who also happened to be working that night, so she decided to text her aunt to see if there's any silver alerts in the area. Immediately, her aunt texted back to say there wasn't. That alone gave me goosebumps to my core. There was no explanation as to where this lady come from. About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. My background: the Chickasaw National Recreation Area. I loved that park so much. I rode my bike for miles. I walked nearly every trail and rode every road. Every day, I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. However, one night, I had rode out a bit further than normal. On my way back, however, I decided to ride the trail from an area known as Buffalo Springs, where they have buffalo roaming. Sounds so cool. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a stone bridge across the creek up the road to my home. It was dark, and I had the full moon aiding me. If it weren't for that, it would be pitch black. I was maybe a few hundred yards from it when I got a sharp pain in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what hit me. I heard a noise, sounding like something hitting the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock about the size of a baseball lying across the trail. I'm confused and begin looking up the side of this hill. Just as I turn my head to look, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down, hitting my front wheel. I finally have my eyes adjusted to look and see someone very tall, covered in hair at the top of the hill, frying things, screaming at me. I had this telephone on me and yelled I was gonna call the police. Or at least that's what I made out. I didn't actually have one yet. This annoyed me, but he's more angry. He begins charging down the hill at me. For some reason, I froze, but snapped out of it. I lifted up my bike and took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a huge splashing noise in the creek and seen where a large rock's being thrown. I was in the clear to home, but was frightened all the way there. I went to the ranger station later the next morning and told the ranger I knew about what happened. He says, you think you're attacked by a Bigfoot? Me, I don't know what it was, but something was trying to hurt me out there. Okay, Justin, if I have any more Bigfoot, I'll let you know. I just said fine and left it at that. The very next week I was riding. The PR pulled up next to me and said, "Can you come in?" I said why, and he said he needed to show me something. We headed to the police department in town. Before we got out of the car, he returns and says, "I have a huge apology to make. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't believe a word you were saying at the time. It come to my attention though that a couple was out in the area that night, attacked the same way, seeing someone screaming at them, throwing rocks and sticks. They called the police and they came out with some other rangers, including myself. I immediately thought about what you said. When we arrived and head up the hill, sure enough, we have rocks being thrown at us. We have our guns drawn and are yelling. There's a 6'5" tall, naked guy covered in long hair. Apparently he escaped from the Veterans Center across the lake. Apparently he thought he's back in Vietnam trying to take out the enemy. I was very lucky because he was trying to kill me. We went inside so I could give the police my statement as to what happened. They had him sent to a more secure facility, and to this day I still get shivers when I hike the trail, and I always keep my eyes open up there. I've recently begun helping my mum selling my childhood home, and it sparked the memory of probably the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. So me and my friends were 15. I grew up in a subdivision about 20 minutes away from any towns. It was a very safe neighborhood. Streetlights on the corners, lots of kids, lots of classmates lived there as well. And there was never any fear of us walking to each other's houses or anything late. Now my subdivision was about 3 miles long, and I lived on the end of it. The last mile is a sharp right turn into a hill, with thick woods along both sides of the street, with 4 houses at the bottom, all surrounded by woods. My friend Maddie lived at the entrance to the subdivision. One year, we got about 9 inches of snow and ice. It shut down the roads, people were stranded, and schools are closed for a week. The first day of this snow, me, Maddie, and Kelly spent the whole day playing. We decided to have a big sleepover at Maddie's house that night. When the sun looked like it started setting, we started to trek down my house to get an overnight bag. By the time we finished packing, it was dark out. The wood always enhanced the darkness, but it didn't bother us. The 3 of us started walking, joking, enjoying the night air. As we cleared the top of the hill, we saw something that made us stop in our tracks. A hooded figure standing on the corner, illuminated only by the streetlight. It didn't move. They stood completely stiff, staring straight ahead. It was unsettled, but it easily could have been a neighbor, so with nervous laughs, we started descending the hill. The figure never moved straight ahead. As we got to the bottom, we could see the hood was fur-lined, and they had some sort of black mask hiding their features. We started to get nervous. By this point, it's pretty much blackout, only the streetlights illuminating the darkness. Now after staring at this figure for a good minute, Maddie called out, "Hey, stop messing with us." At this point the figure moves, only shuffling its feet to turn its body in our direction. They extend their hand towards us, and time stops. I can feel my heartbeat in my throat. This gestures to come here, before turning and running back to the woods. We then ran as fast as we could to reach Maddie's house, then bolted the door behind us. The next morning, when I walked home, I stopped at the corner where the figure had been, and felt pure fear. There's only 2 footprints, one leading in the woods, and one leading out of it. Last summer, I was camping with my partner and our 30-pound dog along a creek in a popular area in a nearby national forest. It was an established site, but not as a campground. It had a parking lot, fire ring, a nice flat area with access to the creek. Now in the dead of night, we're awoken by a large truck parked by our car just idling. Eventually 3 men get out. They enter our camp. They're talking quietly. The truck and creak makes us unable to hear what they're saying. I'm pretty sure it's not good though. Meanwhile, our dog has been growling loudly the whole time. Early on, I whispered to my partner to be quiet, hold the dog and hide. I got out of my sleeping bag and put my shoes on. The only thing I had to our defense was a forest axe, halfway between the hatchet and axe. Very useful for getting by in the woods. Now they took their time, perhaps as intimidation, but eventually got closer to our tent. I'd loudly popped the metal hatch, taking the sheath off, preparing to become an axe murderer. All 3 heard the latch. My assumption is they thought it was a gun holster, and they've run off, getting in their trucks, leaving without a word. This happened when I was a teenager, and it still makes me shiver when I think about it. During the early 90s, I used to camp in Wicklow Mountains quite often. For those of you who don't know, Wicklow is quite a large national park on the outskirts of Dublin, Ireland. It's not huge by international standards, but it is big. I mean, big enough to get lost in. Bodies are unearthed from there from time to time, often as a result of a drug deal gone wrong, or because of a family dispute. Without specific information, there is no way that the police could find a missing person in all of those acres of pine forest. In 2017, an army search team found the scattered remains of a person at 8 locations along an isolated 20-kilometer stretch of road running through the mountains. A power tool had been used to dismember the body. Other people have gone missing after they accepted lifts from strangers, never to be seen alive again. Anyway, back to the story. During the summer, me and a group of school friends used to head off into the woods. When the weather was very warm, we even made our own tents out of pine branches slung across a frame. We never had trouble from the locals. That was, of course, apart from the summer of '92. I was with a group of inner city lads who were a little tougher than my other friends. As if the location was not scary enough, the place where we set up our camp was called the Devil's Glen. It was a heavily wooded area with some broad-leaf trees, but there's quite a lot of campfires. It gets very dark once you get into the woods. You also get a lot of deer up there. They can be a hazard to traffic, but you don't really meet anyone. I mean, apart from loggers or the occasional day trippers. It's pretty isolated. We had tents with us, but none of us were properly equipped for the outdoors. After we set up camp, we decided to visit the local town, really just a couple of shops along a main road, and on our way back, some of the gang stole lighter fluid so we can get a fire going. That night, we drank ciders in the woods around a roaring fire as night drew. It begins to rain, lightly at first, but then more heavier. I remembered lying on the ground outside of my tent because I'm a bit drunk. Just then, I can hear what sounds like monks chant far off into the trees. The forest closed in all around us, in all directions. We can't figure out where the chanting's coming from. It sounded exactly like the Georgian chant, But there's something very unsettling about it, something evil, and we start getting very scared. We're just a group of kids from the inner city, and this is before mobile phones. The sound gets closer. At one point, it sounded as though it's surrounding us. I remember my brother screaming to me, who was with us, panicking, "Get him back inside now," dragging me inside. The lads stamped down the fire. A hush now falls over the campsite. At first, we begin to hear what sounds like muffled footsteps approaching. They're very difficult to make out because of the soft pine needles surrounding us, and given the noise we made earlier, they probably didn't belong to animals. Eventually, it's very obvious to all of us what's going on. In the darkness, we could just about make out the shapes of people silently filing past our campsite before they vanish into the trees. The following morning, we set out to investigate. Our walks led us onto a little used tar road near the camp. Scrawled into the surface are pentagrams and other symbols of devil worship. Needless to say, we get out of there. The following year, some of the group go back, including my brother. They get chased out of the woods by men with dogs, and they end up having to walk back to Dublin. Just a few years after our camping trip, a shocking story about Devil's Glen made it into the newspaper. A girl had been handcuffed to a tree and assaulted by a group of men. She was only freed when her cries were heard by locals. Another middle-aged man was abducted, spending 4 days tied to a tree. When he was eventually found, he was close to death. He even spent time in intensive care. Afterwards, the newspapers carried the stories, with headlines like, "The mountains where no one will hear you scream." To be honest, given the number of people that have gone missing in the Wicklow Mountains, I now think we were all very lucky. What probably saved us that night in '92 is that we're in a large group. I shudder to think what might have happened had I been there alone. I still have no idea what's going on in the Devil's Glen. I hope I never find out. So this happened to a couple of friends and me about 6 years ago. The first summer, we're all back from college. We'd been hooligan kids who gotten into weed a little in college. We decided to go to the state park near one of my friend's houses late at night to smoke. For the sake of the story, I'll give you a layout. We parked at the end of this dead end on a wooded road where a path started that led into the park from the back. The park is heavily wooded, with a lake and some recreational areas on the side with the main entrance. The path we're on went parallel to the edge of a large field, with a couple of yards of trees between. A little ways down there was a small gap to access the field. We had stopped in the big field next to the tree line near the gap that led back to the path we walked on. There was a rock there, and my friend began to use it to prepare the fun stuff. It was a really cloudy night, and the only things we could see were what lit up with our phones. After a couple of minutes, we hear something moving in the trees, maybe 30 feet away. I've always been overly paranoid, and insisted that the worst is gonna happen, but my friend said it's a squirrel. A minute later, we hear it again, closer and louder. I say sounds kinda heavy, you think it's a deer, more to calm myself down. Maybe, one of them says. That's when the sound picks up. We all froze, put our lights away. We had all grown up in wooded areas and spent a lot of time hiking and whatever else. We know it sounds like when someone is walking in the woods, or what that should sound like. If it was a person, they were walking slow, and they're way closer than I would have preferred, walking in an unnatural manner. That's already got to me. What animal would walk towards people, not away from them? I get a surge of anxiety and kind of blurted out it sounds like a person. On cue, whoever it was starts running at us through the trees, and one of my friends yells at us to run. We do. We all start running full speed across the tall field of grass, and the whole time we hear the guy running behind us. A minute of running brought us all to a tall rock that's there to prevent the floor from flooding, and began to climb furiously, tripping and scrambling over the rocks to the other side, and run into the woods that ran next to the road we're parked on. We got a little way in, sat in the dark together, absolutely still and silent. We hear nothing though, but don't break our silence or move a muscle for about half an hour. Then we creep through the edge of the road, unfortunately a ways past my friend's car. After 5 more minutes of building the courage, we ran. We waited for my friend to unlock his door so he could unlock the back one and got the heck out of there. However, when my friend began to pack up, and his headlights lit a little way into the path in front of us, we caught a shadow figure of somebody walking right back down that path. So it's now confirmed that it was no squirrel or animal that chased us. It was someone, and God knows what their intentions were. I hate the fact that they're on their own, and there's a group of us, and they're completely unfazed by the numbers difference. Clearly they had bad intentions, whoever they were. I'm just glad that I didn't have to find out for myself firsthand. This isn't my story, but it happened to my friend. Let's call him John, for anonymity purposes. He's a big hunter. This happened in his backyard yesterday. He has a pretty big backyard, and it has a small lake that's of decent size. At the edge of his yard is where the forest begins, and about 50 yards in, he hunts deer, and naturally, he has a deer set up. He was on vacation for a football championship when he came home yesterday and was checking the camera. He was scrolling through and it was deer, and more deer. Then a little girl. The girl had her head down and was holding a doll. She had a big coat on and you couldn't see her face, but she was facing the camera. In the next picture, her forehead was up against the top of the camera and she's just staring into it. She had big brown eyes, literally just staring. In the photo after that, it was the same little girl again, but this time, there was an older man. Not old, but maybe middle-aged. He was holding a shovel and what appears to be an axe, looking at the camera with the girl. Then the pictures ended. Those are the last ones. I will update if I get more information, but he said this just happened to him yesterday night. I really hope there's no bad news to come from this. I used to be part of Search and Rescue for Parks Canada, but that all changed after something I experienced in the foothills 3 years ago. The horror I witnessed truly contrasted the beauty of the surrounding primal landscape. There is something special about this land which is difficult to explain. It's so peaceful. This whole area was considered to be a sacred place by the Aboriginal people. The area is predominantly inhabited by the mighty buffalo, grizzly bears, wolves and mountain lions, among other prestigious animals. But there is something else that inhabits this land, something that has gone unseen for an incomprehensible amount of time. Dare I say that this thing must have witnessed a millennial go by. For all intents and purposes, I call it a vampire. I don't mean a Wendigo, and I don't mean a pale man with slick back hair and a black cape with an Eastern European accent. In a way, this thing seemed like a force that has gone unseen in the wilderness, feeding off the unwary travellers. What it does to its prey is not unlike anything I've ever seen before in nature. It's worse. It feeds like a parasite to continue its existence. This, of course, is me trying to make some kind of sense of what I've witnessed, to have some kind of grasp on the situation, to keep things in order. That year was chaos due to severe electrical storms that caused multiple forest fires, some of which were under control, while others caused massive damage in other areas. Health advisory services were recommended anyone with existing health issues to remain indoors and avoid all strenuous activity. But even that didn't keep the most rugged or most determined outdoorsy men away. Oftentimes, the sky was hazy, with billowing smoke that went on for miles and miles being carried by the wind. There were also fire bans put in place. Anyone caught with a fire at a campsite, or even a fire pit in their backyard, could get a massive fine. Let me tell you about that day. Normally, it would have been a bright sunny day, typical of the season during that time of year. However, the sunlight was blotted out by the heavy smoke that arrived downwards. The trouble started during the middle of the summer that year when a park ranger came across a reserved campsite that was in ruins. There was debris scattered all around the site. The tents had been shredded open, and one was even completely collapsed. The car windows were smashed in, the roof had been torn open. The wreckage clearly showed that some kind of struggle had gone on there during the night. As it turned out, there was a family of 4 that had been using the campsite. It was a father and mother with 2 daughters. The ranger determined that it was likely a bear attack. He called in for backup. The RT and P were called in to the scene alongside search and rescue teams, and a massive search and rescue for the family was commenced. The group I was with was about 10 miles south away from the campsite. This is how far out the scent dogs brought us, but still, there's zero sign of the family at all. How in the hell did we come all this way without finding anything? I mean, no blood, no objects, not even clothing. Heck, there weren't even any footprints in the dirt besides deer tracks. The area we ended up in was thick brush, dominated by boarding spruce trees and rocky cliffs. The canines began acting up, but they began whining and howling with fright, tucking their tails in between their legs, even hiding behind the dog handlers trying to control them. This is highly unusual. It's like they either saw or caught sense of something they didn't like. But what was it? I saw several meters behind the group some people who were arguing about the dogs and which direction to go in. I kept glancing around because I felt anxious. Despite the summer heat, I had that strange sensation of someone walking over my grave. Do you know what I mean? My body shivering, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up on end, and goosebumps formed on my skin. There's another feeling too, the distinct feeling of being watched. I spun around looking in every direction, looking at the trees and rocks, but there was nothing of note to see. What happened next I cannot truly explain. It was against procedure, but I felt compelled to start moving towards an overgrown hiking trail in the southeast. I felt like I was being pulled by some unseen force. I just felt the need. Maybe I wanted to get away from the search and rescue members who were arguing over the tracking dogs going wild. Beyond the thick brush, I discovered a cave entrance in the ground. At the cave mouth, I spotted something bright. It was a child's-sized shoe, with pink stripes on the side of it. I felt my heart sink to my chest. I looked up at the smoky sky and let out a sigh. I noticed an opening in the dark hazy sky, and a beam of sunlight hit me. I snapped out of it and grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the ground. The sloping ground showed signs of something being dragged downwards. I let out a whimper as I entered the cave. I knew there was something in there. I knew there were caves here, but I had never entered alone. But, as I stated, I felt like something was calling me. This is something I still can't describe to this day. I had to crab walk through the entrance, but when I reached the flat ground, I could finally stand upright. 20 feet into the cave, the stagnant air took a hold of the darkness, which was becoming oppressive, but I continued pushing downwards. I stopped and listened very carefully. There was complete silence in the unforgiving darkness. I shined the light down around the cavern and spotted something on the wall. It's an ancient petroglyph carved into the wall. I've never seen that before. It depicted men chasing a buffalo herd off a cliff. I tranced my finger along the primitive art. Pushing onwards into the unknown, I found an object on the cavern floor. It was what appeared to be a very old leather canvas bag. I picked it up and blew the dust off of it. I unbuck it and take a look inside. There's a rusty water canteen, a bronze compass, a leather-bound book, and to my surprise, a very old-looking pistol. I dropped to my knees and grabbed the book out of the bag. The writing on the cover read, "The Demon." I remained still on my knees, trying to comprehend what I was seeing, trying to make sense when a noise startled me. It didn't sound like it was right next to me, but rather it came from somewhere deeper in the cave. It sounded like something being broken or snapped. I continued my search for the missing family. They had to be down there. The glow of the flashlight showed that I had to make my way down another slope. Oh. But at the bottom, I saw something that causes me to freeze. I saw a pair of feet, one barefoot, one missing a shoe. The other was wearing a white shoe with pink stripes. Tears begin to well up in my eyes, and complete sadness has taken over. I had indeed found one of the missing family members, a young girl that couldn't have been older than mine. I gasped in horror of what I saw. First was the look of complete terror frozen onto her face. Those were horrible wounds on her necks and arms. She's completely pale, as all the life and blood has been drained from her. My heart was beating like a jackhammer. I began having difficulty breathing. I begin to shake. My fingers are numb. There was more damage than just what appeared to be bite marks. Her head's at a weird angle. The cold indifference of the universe blasted in my mind, and I began to cry uncontrollably. I frantically reached for the only thing I could use to defend myself, something that works against animals, my flare gun. If there was some kind of animal down there, I knew I could scare it at least, I think. A shuffling sound caused me to back up against a tunnel wall. There was something in there with me. Nausea began to take a hold of me, and my mind felt as though it was swirling. I was feeling cold, but sweat was running down my face, telling the opposite. With my hands trembling, I summoned the courage I have to move the flashlight to the direction of the source of sound, my sanity now holding on for dear life, and when I saw the thing, I thought I was gonna die right on the spot. The very sight of the being, the very knowledge that this creature exists, reaches straight into the deepest depths of my psyche, right down into the primal fear that exists in all living things. I wanted to retreat, but I couldn't. This is what I saw in that dark cave system. Have you ever read a National Geographic magazine or watched a Discovery Channel? If you have, you are probably familiar with Otzi the Iceman, the man whose frozen corpse was found in a glacier, having been there for thousands of years in the Alps. This is what I could compare this being to. Its leathery discoloured skin was pulled tight to its skeletal frame. The mouth is filled with yellow teeth. In fact, its mouth and chest are smeared in blood. The thing's not even looking at me. It was crouched on the top of the bodies that belonged to the rest of the missing family. The mother and daughter had their throats torn apart. On top of the pile directly beneath the creature was the father. Its eyes are closed. I'm really not sure if I'm dreaming now. It now emits a strange sound while slowly turning its head towards me. Its eyes snapped open. The eyes appear pure black, probably because of the darkness. This thing just appears to be an ancient vampire, but it can't be true. Strange thoughts race through my mind, like where did it come from? Am I having stress-induced psychosis, or is this actually here? In my mind, I'm starting to slip, as it began to stand upright and continue towards me, continuing to make the strange sound. The flare gun. I point directly at it, pulling the trigger. There's a very loud bang and the entire cave is lit up. It's honestly nearly blinding and deafening simultaneously. This thing is gonna kill me. I start running as fast as I could. My body was scraping against the cavern walls. I could see daylight just ahead of the cave entrance. I crawled up it as fast as I could, pushing my body to its limits. I spilled out onto the surface area, facing a bright blue sunny sky. The smoke had finally cleared, at least for now. The spruce trees gently swayed in the wind overhead. I clumsily get up onto my feet and backed away from the entrance to the cave. The creature never emerges from the darkness. I could just make out a set of glowing red orbs from the darkness. I know it's that creature. The rest of the team hurried through the brush to come and find me in shock. I told them I found the family down there. I told them what was down there, and armed policemen and park rangers went down there to get the remains of the family, but there's no signs of what killed them. I quit the very next day. No one believed me. The weirdest thing that ever happened to me was when I was 14 and camping with some of my friends. I was camping in my own tent. I went to a military store and got a really cool US Army tent with a big star on the side of it. Man, I loved that thing, but I digress. So we're out in a national park near where we all live. I'm a bit away from my friends. Now, as I'm sleeping, I'm awoken by the sound of rustling. Just as I'm about to get up to investigate what's happening, I see the silhouette of a man and I drop down. Now, stupid for me, I have a screen open and I can see through it. I get the fright of my life as this homeless looking person presses his face right up against the screen. He then screams at the absolute top of his lungs and runs off. What's worse is my friends don't believe me and think it's me playing a prank on them. I ended up digging a hole and sleeping half underground because I was so terrified he'd come back. Josie Twyman. Hi, I'm in Minal. You might not believe this. I'm shaking and sweating just typing this. For a while, after I moved out from my parents, I lived in a cabin right by the Dixie National Forest where there's endless acres of land. I spent most of my free time fishing, hiking, and my favourite thing to do is to get lost in the woods and find my way back by sundown. I have a habit of following animal tracks, but that led me to this tragedy. It was about midway through the spring. I set off into a new patch of dense woods. I found that I was on what appeared to be a coyote track. I followed them deep into the trees. It was still fairly cold, and as it got darker under the canopy, it felt below freezing. I was 4 hours into the hike when I noticed something is off. The planet life seemed to be dead and dying now. The birds and bugs are silent, yet still, there's faint tracks that I can still see just ahead, and I want to follow them. Then I stumbled upon it. The coyote. All I see is this black silhouette, and the glare of 3 beady eyes. I couldn't believe it. Time stood still. I can't breathe. I darted immediately into a hole in the ground by where it stood. I turned and ran as fast as I could. I ran and run sobbing. I thought it might have been a hallucination, but the eyes bored into my mind. All I can see is those eyes. I suddenly fell straight down into the dirt, exhausted. Everything's aching. The sun was setting. I need to get out. I was absolutely mortified. I made my way again, walking quickly, feeling as though I'm being watched, like an eternity, but soon I make it back to the cabin. Everything ached. I locked every door and the window, and closed the blinds. After an hour or so of time has passed, I warm up over some leftover spaghetti. It was pretty terrible tasting, honestly, but before I went up to my bed in the loft, I ate a bowl of ice cream to treat myself for going through the stress that day. I turned off the lights and sat in my bed reading a book with a small little book light. Something felt very wrong, like eyes watching me. Every hair on my body was standing on end. I sat motionless for as long as I could. As I slowly turned my head to the window to look behind me, which had no blinds, I see it. 3 bright eyes shining, standing in the window right outside. It honestly felt as though somebody punched the wind out of my lungs. I hopped over the rail and landed down on the floor. I hit my side when I landed, scrambling into the guest room with no windows and locked the door. I curl up against the wall in the corner, wrapping a blanket around myself. I'd forgotten one thing. The cabin is slightly raised. You can still access under the trap door. The closet in that room. Man, I heard the scratching. It got closer. It honestly felt like it was enveloping over my entire body. From within the closet, I heard it. It climbed up through the door and was about to break out of the closet. I bust the door open, ran through the cabin into the Jeep. I turned the key and wait for the lights to turn on. Now I get this horrible smell like something's rotten. To my left, I see it. Jaws like a snake. I don't know if this is what people describe as a Wendigo, but I didn't take time to look. I drove until my gas was about to run out, and I made it to the closest town. I used up the remaining medical marijuana I had on me to get some rest. And when I woke up the next day as dawn broke, I continued driving all the way back to my folks' place. I put what happened aside, got my own apartment deep in the city, but in my sleep, I see the eyes. Every single night, I wake up sweating and shaking. The doctors say if I don't sleep, I risk serious health issues. Maybe it's just exhaustion-related deliria, but I could swear I heard the scratching outside my window again. I can only hope that it will leave me. Now to this day I don't know who done it or why, but I could have very easily died camping last week. I'm an avid hiker and mountaineer, so I love to be in the outdoors. That all changed though. There was a group of people who were acting suspicious, also hiking on the same trail as me. I thought nothing of them, and went to go and sleep one night, sure I was miles away from them. However, I'm awoken to the sound and smell of things burning. I look up, and to my horror, there's a massive blaze around my campfire. These psychopaths have literally tried to set fire to my very own campground. I can see them laughing as I'm sprinting off into the distance, terrified. I called the police and park rangers, and they said they've had a problem with people setting fire to things, and they'll launch a full investigation. I still haven't heard anything back yet. The following happened when I was 12. It was the summer of 2003, and I was at my best friend's house for a birthday party who was also turning 12. I remember it was her, myself, and maybe like a handful of other kids around the same age playing at her rather large home, just being kids playing around, playing music and having fun. We were planning on having a slumber party, and we're all really excited to see Austin Powers and Goldmember at the movies. That afternoon, us kids got into my best friend's mum's car and went to a nearby dollar store to pick up a few fun toys to take back to her home. After we had the typical pizza and cake, we decided we got bored staying inside to go outside. My best friend's house is situated right next to a huge golf course, which meant that her backyard was essentially this ginormous golf course. It extended deep into the woods. I distinctly remembered us hanging out on the field, just being silly and playing games where we had to run around inside those sandy groove things of the course, as fast as we could without falling. At this point, the sky turned overcast and a few of us started to complain about getting bored. and what we should do next. A few of us were kind of running around, but of course, you can only do that for so long. It started to drizzle, and we decided to remain outdoors since it wasn't raining too heavily. I noticed the other side of our driveway and the house was a cul-de-sac where some new houses are being constructed. So me being a curious 12-year-old wanted to go and check it out since it was empty and there were no other cars there and I saw no workers or trucks or anything. I was checking out the new house when I looked inside the dark empty space. It was completely isolated until I heard what sounds like whistling. At that point I was entirely alone and wasn't frightened just to listen. It wasn't windy so I wasn't sure what was causing the whistling. I stood there for maybe another few minutes just kind of feeling like an adult, kind of stupid. I was only 12, but it felt kind of grown up to be here in the construction area of the woods alone. I was walking around and it was still raining on me. I almost forgotten until all of a sudden the whistling returns. Only this time it's louder, but a lot closer to where I was standing. By now I was starting to get a little scared, and I walked back to where the rest of the kids are on the golf course. I asked my best friend since I knew her the most and didn't really know the other kids that well, if she or anyone else whistled after me. She shakes her head and said no way. We're playing around on the other side of the course this whole time. We thought you were inside the house or something. So I thought that's really weird, but I shake it off. At this point it was raining, but not hard, and we're all in agreement about hanging out and having fun outside. One of the girls had the bright idea of heading to the woods, which is after the field. So we headed into the woods, and we were kind of playing one of those silly games that doesn't really have an objective or anything, just kind of doing whatever. As I said, I didn't really know most of the other kids too well, but had a fairly good idea of what each of them were wearing. We headed in, and were maybe about 50 feet in when all of a sudden they got freakishly quiet. I'm someone who walks cautiously, so I had my head down for a moment or two, but when I lifted my head up, I can't find anyone. It's the weirdest thing. I stopped in my tracks and tried to gauge the distance from where I thought the original spot was. When I was back with the group, it made little to no difference, because now it was becoming all the more clear that I was totally alone, as if I were picked up and dropped into the woods in the middle of nowhere, and it got dark real quick. Now I'm scared. I've really never experienced anything like this before. I tried calling out to my best friend but was met by total silence. In fact, it wasn't regular silence, it was almost deafening. The kind that you're not really used to, well at least not me, so I got really scared. I had nothing with me to help me find my bearings. Things only escalate when I heard the whistling sound again, and I stood there in silence once again. Instinctively not wanting to crunch on the leaves or break a twig, I didn't want to create a sound or attention my way, so I just want to hear it again, even though it was literally the scariest whistle I've ever heard. I can't really describe it. It sounded definitely human, as though something was missing though. My best attempt to describe it was like, it was there. It knew I was and was getting closer, and darker still. I have tears in my eyes now and I don't know what to do. I finally heard off in the distance some rattling, and one of the kids go, "Why are you over here?" I told her what happened, and she gave me this weird look, like she didn't know how to respond. The others came back, and I decided that unless they ask me a specific question about it, I'm gonna keep it to myself. We go back into the field and back to the home. I remember looking over the lights that come from within my best friend's house, and then looking back over the woods from where we just were, and I faintly heard the whistle again. After hanging out a little while watching Sailor Moon videos, it's time to go to the movies. We're really excited, and I remember it was definitely nighttime now. We're all outside now and getting into my best friend's mum's SUV, and myself and maybe like 3 or 4 other girls walked around over to the field. We're maybe 25 feet into the darkness. We're all giggling and being silly, when suddenly a bright orange light turned on ahead of us. We all scream in unison. Back to the car. Someone said, "What is it?" I tried peering into the darkness ahead, as I made out what appears to be the figure of an old man carrying a lantern or something. We were kind of standing by the car waiting for my friend's mum to come out and for us to go, but we're kind of powerless when he was heading towards us, very slowly. We're all kind of really scared now and didn't know what to do. Thankfully I heard a sound to my right, and it was my friend's mum as she got into the driver's seat. I look back over at the direction of the lantern, or whatever it was, but it's totally vanished. The rest of the night and slumber party was totally uneventful, and we're asking each other what each of us thought the person was. I'm 27 now, and I sometimes have nightmares about being in those woods again. I really have no explanation for it, and that whistling was the most scary thing that I've ever heard in my life. I guess I should start by saying that this happened in early September of 2016. I'm a 25-year-old female that lives in the rural part of northern Arkansas with my fiance, near the lake to be exact. It's gorgeous, lots of open land, plenty of woods and hardly any neighbours. It's what my soul always wanted. I'm also an only child, and would have been pretty much spoiled my whole life. My father, for as long as I can remember, would randomly bring toys home. Not just little toys, I'm talking go-karts, buggies, and even four-wheelers. So, since I was young, I knew how to drive just about any off-road vehicle. I loved it. We even had jet skis at one point. My parents were very laid back with me, to the point that they would nap during the day and let me ride out on the buggies until dark. I forgot to mention that I just moved recently full-time to the property. For years we'd only visit on weekends and not really do as much as we wanted, but now we could do whatever we wanted. It's great, honestly. Now, my parents live about 3 hours away from the land. Seeing them on the weekend is a treat. They bring all kinds of goodies. The land is so beautiful. About 30 acres, more than half of which is cleared. Years ago a small farm was here. The old barn still stands, and of course a pond with tons of frogs. One night, we all get a wild hare and decide to go for a night ride. My father now has a Jeep, so my fiance, him and I ride together. Me and my mother decide to ride separate wheelers. These wheelers are fairly new, automatic, so they're really easy to ride. And damn, I also forgot to mention that for miles outside the property is a wildlife reservation, so there are miles of woods and dirt trails. So many that you could be gone all night. Behind the property about 20 minutes out is a creek. Once you pass through it, you will go up the mountains to see the other side of Cherokee. There's also a crap ton of logging roads, but before you get into the logging trails, there's a dirt road you have to take. I've taken this for years and years now. I've had some weird feelings out there, but this night will be with me until I die. Now my dad, fiance, aunt and uncle had gone ahead of us, about 5 minutes or so. My mum and I head out after making a drink. After we pass through the creek and up the mountain, I notice the beams on my mother's wheeler begin to dim. Normally, they do this because your fan is too cool and the engine's kicked on. So I didn't think anything of it. I want to let you know that there are 5 houses near the end of the road and near the beginning, so there's about a 5-mile long gap of woods and an occasional dirt trail for a gas as well. And by the way, gas wells are everywhere up here. As we get closer to the trail we're supposed to take, my mother's wheeler starts backfiring. We stop for a second to see what's going on when it dies. Now, like I've said, I've been out in these woods my entire life. I wasn't afraid at all. No weird feelings or anything. My mum calls my dad to tell him what's going on, but no calls are going through. They must be going down the mountain, my mother said with an aggravated tone. I turn off my wheeler, but the headlights are on. The road is narrow. So narrow that 2 cars can barely squeeze by. I don't want some drunk idiot flying around the corner and not seeing us. My mum now cries out to my dad again. I start looking at her wheeler. Something isn't right. There's no power on it. But no fuel is getting to the engine, which could be caused by a lot of things. So I get my phone out to text my fiance, letting him know that we're stuck in the middle of the road. We're sitting there for a good 10 minutes when all the hairs on my body start to stand up. I immediately look in the direction of the headlights to see a man walking from pitch darkness. He had no light and said nothing. It took a second for my brain to register what I was seeing. As my mother finally got to my dad on the phone, I whisper to her, "Mom, there's a guy walking up to us." My mum tends to panic at times, and I never took my eyes off of him. He was still far enough away that I couldn't make out many features. My mum is freaking out and I tell her to leave her stuff and jump on my wheeler, and she does so, and I tell the guy that's obviously getting closer, "Hello? What the hell?" He says nothing. That freaks me out. Like, who the hell walks down on a pitch black road in the middle of the night without a light? And not to say something as you approach strangers. And that's when it dawned on me. He must have been creeping in the woods down the road. Voices echo like crazy here, so he probably knew we were women. Normally I keep a 38 on me, but I left it at home. Of all times, why? I start my wheeler up and my mum hops on. The man's getting closer now. Now I can make out a red flannel shirt and dirty jeans. Dark but not much hair, and he had a gun. Not in his hand, but on his hip, invisible. He still won't say a word to us, which makes me kinda panic even more. He's also not looking at us, but rather at the ground. I realise I can't back up because I can't see a thing behind us, so I throw it in higher and take off past him. As we pass him though, he just stood there, facing and following our direction yet never looking at us. It's pretty disturbing. We make it damn near to the creek and my mother was able to tell my dad everything. He immediately turned around when he heard us yelling. He was on a 4-wheeler and could arrive in about 4 minutes. As we met back at the wheeler, the guy's still there, on his own wheeler. My mum and I just sat there staring at this weirdo. He never gave me or my mum eye contact. I'm really getting freaked out now, and we all end up heading to the creek to talk. As we all shut our vehicles off, my dad says, "Where did he come from?" I told him, "The darkness." He just walked up without a light from the road. My fiance chimes in. He had a wheeler and tow straps. You all didn't think about this, did you? You all didn't talk to him or anything? My mum and I just stare at each other with open mouths. This guy was going to take our wheeler. He never asked us if we needed any help. He didn't say or do anything but act weird. The man had told my dad his wife heard people yelling in their driveway. We didn't pass any driveway. The next day, me and my fiance head to the same spot to check out this driveway. We reached just about where the wheeler died, and just a few 100 yards down the road is an overgrown driveway. We drove up and decided to walk the rest of the way. Tucked far behind in the woods was a rundown barn. It's more of a cabin with no power, no vehicles and signs of recent life, and definitely no signs of a wife. There was an outhouse behind the barn. As we walked up to the windows, we noticed a man's wheeler sitting behind the barn. I look at my fiance, who has a scared look in his face. Inside the barn was stuff you'd expect to see in a garage. No indication of human life. As we backed away slowly, I noticed there's a van hidden in the woods around the homestead. Now I'm pretty sure it didn't work, but still. And that's when my fiance grabs my hand, and we quickly go back to the Jeep. On the way home I told him about the vans. He said he saw them too. He notices them at the same time he sees a man staring at him from inside the barn. You must always bring protection when you go to the middle of nowhere.